It's an honor to have David Schoen joining us tonight. Just a couple days ago, the organization that he's with, Zionist Organization of America, they honored former President Donald Trump.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump receiving a hero's welcome on Sunday here in New York at the Zionist Organization of America's annual gala event. Trump bestowed with the ZOA's highest honor, the Theodore Herzl Medallion. Trump spoke about some old grievances, some new challenges. He did mention once again that he's disappointed that American Jews at large do not support Israel as much as he does. We spoke with a former member of his administration on just that point. She said, you know what? He's right.
When I become president, the days of treating Israel like a second-class citizen will end on day one.
To help Israel. And which brings me to the purpose of this show tonight. The Biden administration has taken upon itself to conduct their own investigation, an FBI investigation, into the death of an Al Jazeera journalist who was killed in Jenin. She was covering an encounter between the IDF and Islamic Jihad terrorists or Hamas terrorists, whatever group they want to say they're with. Prior to that, there were 4 major terrorist attacks in Israel. In Hadera, in Beersheba, in Evad. It was quite gruesome, the terrorist attack that happened in Elad, in fact. Jews were hacked to death with axes. Hacked to death. And when these terrorist attacks occurred in places such as Jenin, where this Al Jazeera journalist was stationed when Israel was conducting its anti-terror operation, there were celebrations there. They were handing out candies and pastries and dancing in the streets and screaming to kill more Jews. Not a word of that was said, was reported in the media. It was certainly reported in Israel. But it was not on CNN or any of the stations. And it was not mentioned at all by the Biden administration, and certainly not condemned. This investigation by the Biden administration is a blood libel against Israel. There have been American citizens that have dual citizenship in Israel who have been killed by Islamic Jihad and Hamas and an assortment of different terror organizations, Palestinian terror organizations, in Israel, be it in pizza parlors, be it going out to shop. A friend of mine who's an activist, Ari Fold, he was murdered. As he was going shopping, he was loading groceries into his car. A terrorist came behind him and stabbed him in the back repeatedly.
الطعنة لجلك يما الطعنة لجلك خيا الطلقة نطحن عظمك وادخل فيها باب الجنة هبت ريح الجنة هبت ريح الجنة هبت ريح الجنة من أصل حرابي احنا رجال الضفاح.
David Schoen with us tonight that he could number one, address the issue of terrorism, because he's been very involved in the court system, fighting against these terror organizations and representing victims of terror, but also because Like I said, the Zionist Organization of America honored former President Donald Trump, and he knows it's like black and white. Under the Trump administration, this would never happen. This is an abomination. So let me bring on David Schoen. David, how are you tonight?
Very much for having me on.
Very good. It's great to have you. David, you had the Zionist Organization of America had the dinner this week. They honored former President Donald Trump. I'm sure, when you're watching the festivities and the history of President Donald Trump, that what he did for Israel, so many great things, and cutting funding also to the PA and to UNRWA and everything that contributes to the atmosphere of terrorism. When you see and you read and you're aware of the Biden administration launching this investigation, what comes to mind firsthand?
Well, absolute hypocrisy, but also using very important processes, not just diplomatic processes, but investigative processes for political purposes. It's nothing less than political purposes. First of all, Israel has one of the most, if not the most, along with our U.S. one, investigative services, efficient investigative services in the world. What we don't hear talk about anymore, although we did at the beginning of this incident, was the absolute affirmative efforts by the Palestinian Authority to stymie any investigation. They refused to turn over the forensic evidence, and probably, for good reason. So they prohibited any fair and full investigation. But notwithstanding that, the Israel Defense Forces and the investigative arm are the most ethical in the world. They've conducted an investigation to the fullest degree possible. They cannot come to a conclusion as to what caused this, as in most warfare, journalist shooting or killing situations. It's very difficult to tell where it came from, and especially without the forensic evidence. But in any event, the offense is the idea that the United States is going to second guess the only democracy in the Middle East who engages in a good faith investigation. It's an absolute offense. But I'll tell you what, to me, it draws a parallel to a little bit is the Biden administration criticism through Secretary Blinken and President and so on of the potential inclusion of the National Religious Party and Otzma in the new government. Here we are criticizing Ben-Gvir, Smotrich, and others and saying they shouldn't be a part of, we're going to dictate to Israel, they shouldn't be a part of any administration. We don't want to have to deal with them. When we fund the PLO and the PA, and it's never reported in the mainstream media, the PLO Executive Council, as I learned, certainly, but it's public information anyway, but I delved into this depositions with some of the arch terrorists. Their membership includes a number of the most arch terrorist Palestinian organizations in the world. We send money there. I took the deposition, for example, of the Secretary General of the PFLP. They killed an Israeli cabinet minister, Zevi. They've hijacked many planes. They killed American citizens, 2 young girls in Carney Shamron pizza parlor. And this guy testified that he's provided with a chauffeur-driven limousine, a home, utilities are all paid for. And this is with American money that finds its way through the PLO to the Executive Council. So how dare we criticize something like Ben-Gvir or Smotrich being a part of the government in the democratically elected government, and then fund this, or now continue to find back channels to fund the PLO and the PA, knowing that they've continued their pay for slave program.
Well, exactly. And, under the former president, Donald Trump, he cut off that funding.
That's right. Well, that's one of the things. You mentioned the dinner the other night. I mean, we were honored to honor him. I was, I took myself out of the equation as to whether he should be honored because I felt I had a conflict having represented him. But the ZOA decided they wanted to honor him, and I called him up, and he said, absolutely, delighted to do it, personal favor, and so on. And he showed up. When he walked in that door, the room was electric. It was a tremendous venue, 700-800 people there, electric, standing ovation after standing ovation. And he spoke about the issues. But what we talked about, the honor, was in recognition of his work with the Abraham Accords, the Taylor Force Act, stopping the pay for slave program. pulling out of the UN Human Rights Council, where the greatest purveyors of terrorism preside, moving the embassy to Jerusalem. All the other presidential candidates had promised it, administration after administration. It's the law, but they refused to put it into practice. Trying to address anti-Semitism on college campuses through Title VI, the first time including that with other kinds of discrimination, acknowledging that the Golan Heights belongs to Israel and always should. And of course, the Iran deal, which we now see ourselves back into with the same negotiators from the Obama administration handling the negotiation, Robert Malley and others. So those were just some of the reasons, he was honored. And we don't take a political position at the ZOA, but we do recognize service, great service to Israel, and especially when those interests are consistent with the United States interests.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. It's, Israel right now, with their technology and their GDP is exploding through the roof. It's unbelievable, the success of Israel. Exactly what kind of pressure is the U.S., is the Biden administration trying to exert on Israel? And can they effectively pressure Israel into what? Isn't Israel at the point now that they could withstand that pressure?
Well, it's interesting. Netanyahu has spoken for many, many years about self-sufficiency and not being so dependent on America in the first place, but secondly, vulnerable to pressure. What I think you're seeing here that's interesting is someone like, Benny Gantz, who served his country nobly, but certainly moved more to the left. General Gantz has said in no uncertain terms to the Biden administration, we will not cooperate with you with this sham political investigation. We're proud of our people. We're proud of the investigation that we did, and we don't need to be second-guessed by any other country. They always welcome, technical support, but not something like this, a blatant political slap in the face. It's has no place in this process.
Where does the American Jewish community stand with this? I know that J Street supports this investigation, but I don't believe J Street represents the bulk of American Jews, but I could be wrong with respect to the level of assimilation that's going on in America. But I think most congregations in the United States, Jewish congregations, synagogues, support Israel and are outraged by this. What's your take? Because I'm not in America, so I don't know exactly.
No, I listen, first of all, I think we're in major trouble if J Street represents the bulk of Jews in America.
Right,
But that's part of the, unfortunately, that's part of the presentation President Trump felt he had to make the other night. And that is, by the way, this is baffling to me. He's made this statement now on a few occasions that evangelical Christians are great friends of Israel, and that American Jews need to stand up and appreciate the existential threats Israel faces and be more supportive of this. Mainstream media has taken this as an anti-Semitic threat to Jews in America.
Right.
They better wake up. He's saying they better wake up to the existential threat, not they better wake up to some threat he's making against them. It's preposterous. So he made the point that, only 25% of the Jews are voting for positions that are staunchly supportive of Israel. But now it does seem from the midterms that some of that vote is moving a little bit. Listen, Jews are entitled to vote, however they want, but it is critically important that they recognize some of these existential threats and value those over, assimilation and getting along with non-Jews, that sort of thing. We have there's only one country in the world that's the Jewish state, and we all have to recognize the stake we have in it and the safety that is important to provide forever.
Last night on the Late Show, Jon Stewart, he was a guest on the Late Show, and he was asked about anti-Semitism because there's been so much anti-Semitism. We just read about it all the time with Kanye West and on Saturday Night Live, and it's just repeated. And a variety of athletes that are making vicious anti-Semitic statements on their social media platforms where they're reaching millions of people. So Jon Stewart basically sanitized it. And then he goes on and he says, and here's the critical thing. He says he's been called by fellow Jews an anti-Semite, and he goes on, he says, and the reason is because he makes statements against Israel. Now, that is the epitome of going along to get along. And if you want to get on to the Late Show, start stabbing Israel in the back and say you're a proud Jew. It's just ridiculous what's going on. So we got J Street, we got the New Israel Fund, we have people like John Stewart, we have an organization from Israel that's going around making the circuit, being given the red carpet treatment by a variety of BDS organizations. They're called Breaking the Silence, and they receive all kinds of funding from the European Union. And they say they're only against Israel's activities in they use the term occupied Palestinian territories. And what an offense that is, because that means that that Israel has no claim, Jews have no claim to the land of Israel. There's no Jewish attachment to Hebron. There's nothing. And Hamas terrorists and terrorist groups, if you use the term occupied Palestinian territories, that means that those who we call terrorists, they're being viewed and spun as freedom fighters. So then what happened the other day, the terrorist attack, that we call a terrorist attack, they call it, this was freedom fighters out of frustration killing occupiers, European colonizers and that. So that's the problem that exists in the Jewish community, that you have these people like the John Stewarts that are catering to the most vicious BDS positions. And then we see these terrorist attacks, and we're on our own, and we have to defend ourselves. How do you see that?
Right, 100%. And we unfortunately, we see officials in Israel, mainstream officials, using the term occupation. It should never be used. As a matter of law, in my view, and the view of many much more capable people and real legal scholars, it's simply not an occupation as a matter of law. The most anyone on that side could fairly say at this point would be disputed territories, but any fair, reasonable scholar would come to the conclusion that Israel has the greatest right of claim to those areas of any country in the world or any people in the world, period, whether you come at it from one particular agreement or another, or from fighting a war of self-defense, etc. There are many ways to come at it, but we simply have to stop using the term, or using it to get along. I saw the Wall Street Journal use it the other day. I was surprised and disappointed, but again, Israeli officials sometimes use it. Now, listen, these things, picking on Israel for one issue or another, and trying to then reconcile that by saying, well, we only mean about that issue. There's a purpose there in focusing on Israel, which again stands in sharp contrast to these other purveyors of terrorism in the Middle East, who they don't go after. These same people in Israel don't go after those people. So, Sharansky has his 3 Ds. There's something about that for the definition of anti-Semitism. But part of it is this over-demonization of Israel. The singling out of Israel in other countries. Listen, Israel's living under an existential threat at all times. Other officials from other countries who are fair have said it's the most ethical and just defense force of any in the world. And that's the government's, the principle that guides the government. They want peace. I did a presentation about this at the ZOA dinner the other night, because I think it's very important for people at the dinner and otherwise to be engaged in the Zionist process. And what I said is, take a look at Israel's Declaration of Independence, for example. Now, it draws its philosophical framework from the American Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution, and it has all of those provisions for freedom of individual liberties and all of those kinds of things. But it goes out of its way to say, for all citizens, regardless of color, creed, religious background, and so on, it ensures the protection of all religious sites and so on. But it also gives a sense of history and why this is the Jewish state, the only Jewish state in the world, why we have a right from God to this land. This is the eternal homeland of the Jews. And that's in the founding documents of Israel, but also in contrast to every other country in that region, this respect for all other cultures and religions. And everyone knows, if you're fair about it, that the standard of living for other minorities within Israel is higher than in the countries of their origin, and so on. All of those things. It's just hypocritical to say otherwise, and it's not true.
No, absolutely. It's interesting. This week's Parsha, Parshas Chaya Sarah, is the Parsha of Avraham Avinu, and it was, apparently this was the 10th test. And it was supposed to, and the rabbis say it was the most difficult test for him. And it's very interesting because last week's Parsha, we read about the Akedah. And you would think that the Akedah is probably the most difficult test imaginable, because there he is with his son, and he's ready to sacrifice his son. And an angel stopped him, and that's why Rosh Hashanah we have the shofar that's from the ram to remember that. And there's so many instances where we are remembering the Akedah. But in this week's Parsha, this is the 10th test. And what was the 10th test? The 10th test was when he was purchasing Marach HaMikpelah to be a burial place in Hebron for his wife. And they said that was the most difficult. And the negotiations were going on to make the purchase. But in spite of the cost, there was no limit that Avram was ready to go. He was ready to go. It didn't matter if he's being overcharged exceedingly. He made the purchase. And the Zionist movement, when it started, made legal purchases. And the world, the anti-Israel BDS organizations and their supporters throughout the world, they challenge the Jewish people's rights to make that legal purchase till this day. What occurred then, Avram was full of having to defend himself and justify and say he made the purchase, and it's legal and it's binding. And just like the founding fathers of the Zionist movement, when they made the legal purchases of parts of the land of Israel, that's still to this day, we're the only people in the entire world that has to defend our legal claims. You're a lawyer, you see it.
Absolutely, no question about it. No question. You see it in Jerusalem, in areas of Jerusalem that was historically Jewish areas that only were ethnically cleansed through pogroms, etc., within Jerusalem. Now it's as if history started in 1948 or 1967. There was no history before that.
Right.
It's well documented that these were the historic religious Jewish areas and stuff. Now they happen to be, I'll call it, occupied by Arabs who are living there now. But they want to erase the claim of right that the owners who paid for it had. And again, politically, it plays out because they have riots that ensue because of it, and so the world says, "Oh, how dare you displace these people?" Well, we dare displace them because the legal documents show that we actually own those places. How about that?
Right.
It doesn't mean much in the political realm.
I was, I was in Israel a few months ago for a period of time, and I went to the Shimon HaTzadik neighborhood that the BDS, they call it the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. And first, before I got there, I'm reading about it, I'm wondering where is it? It must be really like way out there somewhere, and
Right.
But no, it's actually across the road pretty much from one of the hotels I used to stay at quite a bit in Jerusalem. It was the Novotel Hotel, and that was like on the other block used to be the American consulate there. And I used to walk on Shabbat to go through the Damascus Gate to go to the Kotel on Shabbat. It's a very short walk. And so I'm looking where this is. I'm going, this is it? This is it? And they're saying Jews have no right to live here, and they're being attacked. And there are the legal deeds that the Jews had there. And there's no question about it. And this has become an international issue, challenging our legality to live there, to walk around and go to a synagogue or do whatever you want to do.
Sure. To demonstrate the point also, these last decade or so, Yeshiva Beit Orot has bought properties in the area to, return Jews to living there and all that. But generally, they have to keep the seller anonymous on pain of death. I mean, an Arab seller to a Jew, literally faces the potential of the death penalty. So that speaks volumes. How on earth could we support that kind of system, or given any kind of legitimacy? It's just absurd.
Yeah, it is. And we're supposed to negotiate with these people, some kind of a two-state solution, and in their towns and villages and cities like Ramallah and different ones, they have these humongous red and white signs, danger, no Israelis allowed in, you may be killed, and these are the kind, and that's a polite sign apparently, because you'll see some other sign that will be, with daggers and everything.
When I went to take depositions of these terrorists, the towns where they lived and all that, I had to do many of them by videotape. Jews weren't allowed in, and they didn't allow you in generally because they felt, you'd be killed if you went there. But I remember taking depositions at the American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem and walking out in the eastern part of Jerusalem. I don't call it East Jerusalem as if it were a separate city. So the eastern part of Jerusalem, which must be under Israeli sovereignty forever. But I walked out and I had just taken depositions of some terrorists. And lo and behold, on some storefronts, I see a life-size poster of Ahmed Sadat, the head of the PFLP, one of the arch terrorist organizations, openly just displayed, because Israel's a free society and, they allow that. And by the way, I feel that it should be allowed. I think, these things, what Jon Stewart says or anybody else is saying these days, it's anti-Semitic. I prefer to have it out there. I don't believe in censorship. And I'm very impressed that people on the other side of the issue, reasonable people, are speaking out against them. I think that the best way to deal with these things are in the marketplace of ideas, and so that reasonable people will reject anti-Semitism and all that. Ultimately, unfortunately, it creates a great danger. I was accosted last week in New York, up in Washington Heights. I was walking down the street, and the guy just approached me and picked up the rhetoric of the day, and he saw my yarmulke, and he said, "Oh, you're a fake effing Jew. You stole our history, and I want you to go back where you came from. They'll kill you over there, you fake effing Jew," on and on and on. So, this rhetoric gets picked up, and it becomes dangerous. Important people are speaking out against that also. So,
yeah, it's unbelievable times that we're in right now, but we definitely have our challenges. But David, I want to thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you.
We have to get this information out. We can't be quiet.
Keep doing what you're doing.
It's vital. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for what you're doing as well. And
thank you very much.
I'll see you in Jerusalem.
See you soon. Okay, thank you.